Oh my god. Yeah, it's actually my senior year because there's still true.
Exactly. Before we get started, I'm going to ask our judges to look at our competitors here. Our competitors to take a look at our judges. Does anybody see any conflicts?
No.
All right. So I want to just briefly introduce our presiding judge. This is Judge Stephanie Dixon. Judge Dixon is a real judge on the Los Angeles County Superior Court, and before this, she was a public defender for 27 years. So I think you guys are in good hands. With that, Judge Dixon, your courtroom, you can start when you're ready.
Okay, please be seated, everyone. And good morning. Introductions, please.
Yes, Your Honor, good morning. My name is Margaret Veglahn, and I'm joined here in court today by my co-counsel, Mr. Ian Carson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Together, we represent the estate of Peter Jones in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Katie Volpert, and today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Matthew Fleischer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And today we'll be representing the defendant, Dragon Studios.
Please have a seat. So, I can't remember. There are no motions in limine. Everything's been pre-admitted. Everything's ready to go. Okay, opening statements.
Your Honor, before we proceed to openings, could we just handle a few housekeeping matters?
Sure.
First, Your Honor, we'd move to invoke Federal Rules 603 and 615, which call for the constructive swearing in and sequestration of all witnesses, barring any party representatives, though the plaintiff does not have a party representative in this trial.
Okay.
Your Honor, we do have a party representative, Ms. Coldoy, who's sitting there. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Next, Your Honor, we'd like to note that Exhibits 1 through 25 had been pre-admitted prior to trial. There's about 10 more exhibits that aren't yet in evidence, but the first 25 exhibits, including 2 video exhibits that we may play on a computer at some point, as well as Exhibit 4, which is a physical headphone, those are all already in evidence.
Okay.
Next, Your Honor, we'd just like to note that there are 2 witnesses who won't be taking the stand today, but we do have their sworn deposition testimony. Prior to today's trial, a judge has already ruled that those 2 witnesses qualify as unavailable under Rule 804A, though of course that deposition testimony is still subject to the rest of the federal rules of evidence.
Very well.
And finally, Your Honor, just one more housekeeping matter since we've never had the opportunity to serve in your courtroom before. We'd like to know your preferences when it comes to asking permission. Would you like us to ask to approach opposing counsel, the witness, and Your Honor, or just state it for the record?
You can just state it for the record.
Understood. With that, we're ready for openings.
Okay. And do you have any housekeeping matters, counsel?
Very briefly, Your
Yes.
Honor. If an objection is sustained, can we presume that the testimony has been stricken, or would you like us to move to strike?
For time's sake, let's agree that it's already been stricken.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, we're ready to proceed.
Then let us proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Volpert, members of the jury, may it please the court. The defendant let Peter Jones fall. It's June 20th, 2023. A cloudy day on top of a mountain in Norway. And arguably the biggest action star in cinema history, Peter Jones, is getting ready to jump. But it's not just any jump. Members of the jury, he is about to drive a motorcycle off a 2,700-foot cliff, let go in midair, and parachute down to the ground. Like any actor who does his own stunts, Mr. Jones has practiced over and over and over again. The whole thing is planned, down to the moment, to the meter, to make sure Mr. Jones is safe. As long as he gets the signal to open his parachute, 4 seconds, after he jumps. Everything will be fine. He revs his engine. The cameras roll. And just like that, Peter Jones is in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds before he hears a voice in his headphone, pull. He yanks the cord. He floats down to the ground with his parachute. Safe. So why are we here in court? Well, we're going to call a witness to the stand today. Peter Jones's agent, who we expect is going to tell you that later that same night there was a dinner for the whole cast and crew of that movie. You're going to learn that at that dinner, a woman named Cole Doig pulled Mr. Jones aside. "Your jump was good," she said. "Not good enough. We need as much footage of you free falling as we can possibly get. Let's shoot the stunt again tomorrow, but this time we'll have you wait 9 seconds instead of just 4. Don't worry, I'll give you the signal." Today you're going to learn that that movie studio, Dragon Studios, is the defendant in this case. And Miss Doig, the director, she's also the studio's owner. You're going to learn that when the studio asked Mr. Jones to wait 9 seconds to open his parachute, they were asking him to wait for the last possible moment. Any later, and he didn't stand a chance. It's June 21st. Peter Jones and his team go back up the mountain. The weather's the same. It's a calm morning, a few clouds. He revs his engine. The cameras roll. He's in the air. 1, 2, 3. 4 seconds go by. No signal. You'll learn they let him fall. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds go by, and this is when the studio is supposed to give him the signal. This is the last second he can open that parachute safely, and you'll learn Miss Doig said nothing. They let him fall. 10, 11, 12, 13 seconds go by, and Peter Jones is falling at terminal velocity, falling much too fast to slow down before he hits the ground, and it is the perfect shot. The cameras are getting everything. Miss Doig says nothing. She lets him fall. 14, 15 seconds go by. Peter Jones realizes something is very wrong. He pulls the cord without a signal. It's too little. And it is much too late. He dies on impact. You'll learn Peter Jones dies because this defendant let him fall. That's why Mr. Jones's family has sued Dragon Studios for negligence. As the plaintiff in today's trial, we took on a burden to prove our case to you by what's called a preponderance of the evidence. Just means more likely than not. We have to prove to you 3 things. The studio was supposed to protect Mr. Jones. They failed to do that, and he died as a result. It's a burden we're going to meet today. But you're going to learn that the defense actually took on a burden of their own in today's trial to prove to you by the same standard, more likely than not, that Mr. Jones knew that what he was doing was unsafe, and he did it anyway. When they tell you that, I want you to remember that this case comes down to one very simple fact. The plan that Mr. Jones agreed to was to get that signal at 9 seconds. The evidence will show instead the defendant let him fall. That's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to come before you again and ask you to find the defendant liable. Thank you. May I proceed?
Yes.
The plaintiff knew the risks, and he did it anyway. Members of the jury, this is Koldoik. Ms. Veglahn just got up here and told you that she's irresponsible, that she's reckless, that she let Mr. Jones fall. But what Ms. Veglahn didn't tell you is that Ms. Doig and Dragon Studios actually spent over $1 million making sure the plaintiff practiced that stunt. What Ms. Veglahn didn't tell you is that stunt was dangerous, no matter how many times it was practiced. What Ms. Veglahn didn't tell you, members of the jury, is that when the plaintiff willingly drove a motorcycle off a 2,700-foot cliff, he knew he might die. The plaintiff knew the risks, and he did it anyway. Despite that, the plaintiff has brought a claim of negligence against Dragon Studios. That means they have a burden in this case. They have to prove, first, that the defendant was negligent, second, that Peter Jones was harmed, and third, that the defendant's negligence was the cause of that harm. And they have to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. But you're going to learn that we also have a burden in this case, and there's another reason why you can't hold Dragon Studios liable. It's because we've taken on what's called an affirmative defense. Now, in taking that on, we take on a burden to prove that, more likely than not, the plaintiff voluntarily participated in that stunt, knew the extent of the risks, and died as a result of those risks. We're going to meet that burden, and we'll do it by focusing on 3 questions. First, how did Dragon Studios make that stunt safer? Second, why was that stunt still so dangerous? And third, did the plaintiff know the risks, and did he accept them? So let's start with that first question. What did Dragon Studios do to make that stunt safe? Members of the jury, you're going to hear from Miss Doig today herself. And she's going to tell you that the studio, they spent over a year. They spent over $1 million practicing that stunt. You're going to hear that they put that $1 million into doing thousands of, over 1,000 skydives, over 1,000 jumps. That they built a ramp for the plaintiff to practice on. You're going to hear that they assembled an entire team of experts to make sure that that stunt happened safely. Brings us to that second question. Well, if they did all that, well, why was the stunt still so dangerous? Well, members of the jury, you're going to hear what that stunt was later today. You're going to hear that the plaintiff, he wasn't doing some low-level stunt. He was driving a motorcycle off of a cliff, jumping off that motorcycle and free-falling 2,700 feet before he pulled his parachute. You're going to learn that with a stunt like that, well, just a few seconds can be the difference between life and death. You're going to learn that a stunt like that can be dangerous no matter how many times you practice it. That brings us to that third question. Did the plaintiff know the risks, and did he accept them? Well, members of the jury, you're actually going to hear from that plaintiff's talent agent today. His name is Veglahn. And he's going to have to admit on the stand today that, well, the plaintiff signed a contract for this film. A contract where he agreed to take on the risks of that stunt, including injury and death. Members of the jury, you're going to hear that just one day before he performed that stunt, the plaintiff said he might not survive it. He knew the risks, and he did it anyway. That's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to come back before you, and I'm going to ask that you find Dragon Studios not liable for negligence. Thank you.
You may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Eli Veglahn. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Of course. Good morning. My name is Elijah Veglahn.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a talent agent at my agency a couple blocks from here.
How'd you become a talent agent?
Well, I started off at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, moved across the country, went to UCLA Law, but I realized I preferred Suits, the TV show, over the actual one, so I decided to go into a talent agency.
Sir, could you open that binder in front of you up to Exhibit 3? I'm approaching the jury with 2 copies. Your Honor, you should have a copy in that binder. Sir, do you recognize this person in front of you?
I do. This is Peter Jones.
How do you know Peter Jones?
Peter was basically the greatest action star of our generation, so I had the pleasure of being his agent for his career.
Are you still Mr. Jones's agent?
No, ma'am. We were filming a movie last June, and he died during one of the stunts.
Mr. Veglahn, I'm sorry to hear that. Before we talk about that stunt, I want to give the jury a chance to hear a little bit more about Mr. Jones. Could you tell us some about him?
Of course. Peter and I worked together for about 12 years before he died. Like I said, the guy was full of talent. Been in every big movie for the past decade. Great guy.
Sir, you said that he was in action movies. Did they ever have stunts?
Of course. He did his own.
You mentioned he was filming a movie in June of 2023. Were there any stunts in that movie?
There was. There was this big scene that was supposed to be about 2/3 of the way in. He was going to ride a motorcycle off the side of a mountain, let go of it in midair.
You were his agent, sir. Were you there for the planning of those stunts?
I was.
Were you there for the filming of that stunt?
Yes, ma'am. I was there for both days.
Hold on, sir. Both days.
That's correct. We started filming about 6 of the takes on the Saturday, the 20th, I think it was. But then we had to go back Sunday because we needed another take.
So I want to talk about what changed between those first 6 takes on the 20th and the other take. Where were you when those stunts were being filmed?
I was on the ground. It was me, the producers, the stunt coordinators. We were watching from the command center.
Did you have any way to keep time in that command center?
Yeah, there was a clock on the wall.
So, sir, would you be able to walk the members of the jury through a video of one of those successful stunts?
Yes, ma'am. I think so.
Mr. Veglahn, if you could just step down here, we're going to pull up a video of Exhibit 1. This is already in evidence. So, sir, if you could just walk the members of the jury through what you remember from this stunt.
Of course. So this was the build-up that he did down the mountain. He let go, and about 4 seconds after he tests the parachute, they call in and they yell, pull, pull, and he's supposed to pull it as soon as it happens.
Thank you, sir. You can retake your seat. So you said that someone was supposed to radio him to pull his parachute cord. Who was that?
It was the director at the time, Cole Doig.
Cole Doig, do you know if she was involved in Dragon Studios at all?
She was. She's actually the owner, the president of the company at the time.
Did you hear Cole Doig radio for Mr. Jones to pull his parachute in all 6 of those takes on the first day?
Yes, ma'am. On the 20th, every single time we ran the take, Doig yelled pull into the radio for him.
Did Doig ever talk to you about changing that stunt?
She did. Later that night, the cast and crew got together for a dinner. She pulled me and Peter to the side and said she liked the takes, but they didn't seem long enough, so she wanted to get some more.
Did she say exactly how she wanted to change the stunt?
She said she wanted to change it from 4 seconds after liftoff to about 9.
Did she say why?
She said she wanted to get as much footage as she could to put into the actual movie.
So Miss Doig said that she wanted to wait 9 seconds to deploy that parachute. Did she say if that was safe?
We were told that it would be fine.
So I want to talk about whether Cole Doig let Peter Jones fall. You told us that you were in the command room on the second day of that stunt. How did it start?
That day, it was just me and Cole. All the other producers were out of the room. The rest of the cast and crew were down on the ground. Peter was up on the mountain, getting ready to go off. He rides down like normal, and then the ramp happened.
Did you hear Cole Doig radio for Mr. Jones to pull his parachute after 9 seconds?
No, ma'am.
Did you hear Cole Doig radio for Mr. Jones to pull his parachute at all?
No, ma'am.
What happened next?
It was about 15 seconds, I think it was. At that point, Peter ended up just pulling it himself, but at that point, he was too low to the ground. He died on impact.
Did you say anything to Miss Doig?
I did. I started yelling at her, asking her why she didn't call it in sooner. How could she let something like this happen?
Sir, what was her response?
She looked me in the eyes and told me she wanted a longer take, that she thought she had more time.
Thank you for your time, sir, and I'm sorry for your loss. I have nothing further.
Cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
May.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gaggion.
Good afternoon.
I want to start with something you just told us on direct examination, all right?
Of course.
You just told us that Miss Doig, she never gave the signal on the radio, right?
That's right, ma'am. We were in the tent. We were waiting for the 9-second mark, but even after 10, she hadn't said anything yet.
You just told us on direct examination that Miss Doig just watched Peter Jones fall to his death, isn't that right?
That's right. It seemed like she was waiting for a little bit more footage. I tried to yell at her, say, what are you doing? But she just threw her hand up as if she wanted me to stop talking.
Well, hold on, sir. Peter Jones was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, like you just told us, right?
He was.
He was in almost every big movie over the past decade, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, you can agree that having one of the biggest movie stars in the world in your movies, well, that can be helpful for sales, right?
I suppose so.
And well, if that movie star is dead, well, you can't film any more movies with them, can you?
No, ma'am.
So, sir, you're telling the members of this jury that Miss Doig let her big movie star die for a couple seconds of footage? Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. We were in the tent. She didn't radio. Told me that she just wanted a little bit more.
A couple seconds of footage in one shot,
Yes, ma'am.
in one movie.
Yes, ma'am. But this was the 7th one in the franchise. Each one was bigger than the last one, so that's why we decided to go with this stunt.
So, sir, that's a yes to my question for one shot in one movie, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, you can agree that it was just you and Miss Doig in that control room, right?
That's true. The rest of the crew was scattered on the ground.
So, sir, you can't name a single other person who can corroborate what you're telling us right now.
I guess not, but I'm just telling you what happened.
Then, sir, I want to talk about how risky that stunt actually is, because we just saw that video on direct examination, right?
Yes, ma'am, from the 20th that day.
So, sir, Mr. Jones, he drives a motorcycle, right?
Yes,
Drives it off a cliff.
that's right.
That cliff's 2,700 feet high.
Approximately, yes, ma'am.
No harness.
No, not in the actual takes. In the practice runs, they were harnesses.
And let the record reflect on retrieving Exhibit 4, which is already in evidence, a single earbud, right?
That's right. So Peter had one of those in his ears, and that's what Cole would be radioing into.
So, sir, a single earbud that could fall out at any moment, right?
I suppose so.
Sir, you even actually heard Mr. Jones talking about how risky that stunt was, didn't you?
Objection, Your Honor. Substantially more misleading than it is probative. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, we believe the quote that Miss Volpert is referring to, that Mr. Jones said he knew how risky the stunt was, is actually referring to the original version of the stunt, before the plan was changed. Their burden in today's case is to prove that he assumed the risk of the stunt that actually killed him on June 21st. This quote just goes to mislead the jury, and it has a very low probative value because it doesn't actually go to their burden in this particular case.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
This objection goes to weight, not admissibility. Your Honor, it's certainly probative to hear that Peter Jones thought that it was risky to do that stunt even before the time was changed.
I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Continue.
Yes, Your Honor. So, sir, I'm going to ask that question again. You actually heard Mr. Jones talking about how risky that stunt was, right?
Yes, ma'am. In the weeks leading up, we talked about how the stunt would go.
Well, sir, not in the weeks leading up, just the day before, right?
We did an interview with a local news company. It was about 4 of us.
That's
Yes.
right. So just one day before that stunt, you heard him talking about how risky it was, right?
Yeah, he was talking about the preparation that went into it.
So you heard him say that there were so many things that could go wrong.
Yeah, I did.
Sir, you heard him say that he might not survive that stunt. Isn't that right?
He said that he chose to film it first before the rest of the movie because it wouldn't make any sense if he died in the beginning.
That's right, sir. He said, if I don't survive this, there's no point in having the rest of the movie already filmed, right?
That's what he said.
Well, then, sir, I want to talk about whether he accepted those risks he was talking about. Now, you had him sign a contract for this movie, didn't you?
That's right. We always have our stars do that.
You would recognize that contract if I were to show it to you?
I believe so.
Well, can you flip to Exhibit 33 for me and let me know when you're there?
I'm there.
So this is that contract, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a fair and accurate copy.
Looks like it.
Doesn't look to be changed or altered in any way.
Not from what I could see.
And can you tell us whose signatures are there at the bottom?
Of course, it's Peter's, mine, and then Cole Doig's, the president of the company.
Defense offers Exhibit 33 into evidence.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, a contract is definitionally not hearsay, as it's not a statement, it's a verbal act.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
Your Honor, for a contract to not qualify as hearsay, for it to have independent legal significance, it has to be at issue in this case. The contract in Exhibit 33 is specifically for the planned stunt that occurred on June 20th, not the changed version of the stunt that occurred on June 21st. This contract doesn't actually affect the stunt where Peter Jones died. Therefore, it doesn't have independent legal significance in this case.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
It absolutely does have independent legal significance in this case. If I may proffer, Your Honor,
Yes.
you're going to hear that in this contract, he agrees to perform a stunt where he drives a motorcycle off a cliff, drops 2,700 feet, and pulls his parachute. Your Honor, that's the stunt that happened in this case. We're going to talk further about the 4 seconds versus 9 seconds, but it doesn't make this any less probative.
Are the details of the actual stunt included in the contract?
Your Honor, the contract references a stunt plan, which has all of those details.
But it doesn't talk about 6 versus 9 in the contract.
No, Your Honor, not the 4 versus 9 specifically.
Okay.
Your Honor, it does refer to the 4. My apologies.
I think this one's a close call, but I am going to allow it to be introduced. But it's very close.
Yes,
Your Honor.
So, I'm just going to read some of these excerpts. Let me know if I read these correctly. So this says that the performer accepts the normal risks of filming a movie, right?
That's what it says.
It says including risk of physical injury on set, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
It says performer accepts the risks, including the risk of death, of the stunt described in the attached stunt plan document. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. That stunt plan, it's the same document. We wrote it the same day, back in June of 2022. It talks about him having to receive that signal 4 seconds afterward.
That's right, sir, those 4 seconds. But after that plan was changed to 9 seconds, you actually heard Mr. Jones agree to that, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, then I want to talk about why he might have accepted those risks. Sir, like you told us, he's an action movie star, right?
He is.
He makes a living off of doing crazy stunts, doesn't he?
It's a little bit part of his reputation. He liked to do his own stunts, wanted to be one of the actors that did things others couldn't.
That's right, stunts like this one, right?
Yes, ma'am.
He got paid a lot to do it, didn't he?
More than I did.
Sir, you can see in this contract he was getting paid $35 million to film this movie.
That's right. That's what we signed off on.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Redirect?
Yes.
Sir, Ms. Volpert just asked you some questions about a contract that Peter Jones signed. I want to be very clear. Was that contract for the stunt that was performed on June 21st?
No, ma'am. This one's specifically for the one that was done on June 20th. There's a stunt plan that goes with it. We all wrote it together. It talks about doing it after 4 seconds. Nothing about 9.
Sir, when you had that conversation with Miss Doyle, was there a new contract that was signed?
No, ma'am.
Does this contract outline the additional risks associated with waiting 9 seconds instead of 4?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Is there recross?
Yes, Your Honor, time permitting. Sir, I just want to be very clear. The only difference between the stunt in this contract and the stunt that was agreed to is the 4 versus 9 seconds, right?
Yes, ma'am. I suppose so. But in the other stunt plan, we figured that they would call it at some point. But on the 21st, Doig never called it at all.
So, sir, that's a yes to my question. The only difference between what was agreed to here and the stunt that was planned on the day of was the 4 versus 9 seconds, right?
Between the plans, yes. But between what actually happened, no.
And, sir, you heard Mr. Jones agree to change the plan to 9 seconds, did you not?
Right, after Doig told us the stunt coordinator had mentioned it and that the press would be impressed by it.
Nothing further.
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that Mr. Gogion be excused.
And you are excused.
And with that, the plaintiff rests our case in chief.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we proceed, can we publish Exhibit 33 to the jury?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, with that, may we proceed with direct examination?
Can we publish very quickly and then you can proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Ms. Cole Doig to the stand.
Good morning.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself to the court?
Hi there. My name is Cole Doig.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a filmmaker, director, producer, but my proudest work is my company, Dragon Studios. I own it.
How'd you get into all of that?
You know, my cousin, Vinny, he's the reason I got into the film industry in the first place. But then he left to become a lawyer. For some reason, couldn't be me. But I've been working ever since. We do pretty well.
What types of movies do you work on?
All of them. Drama, action, comedy. We do it all and we do it the best.
Ma'am, did you ever work with Mr. Jones?
I did.
What did you work with him on?
So me and Peter, we was working on the All Lost series. I'm sure you heard of them. They're these thriller action movies with the crazy stunts, right? We was working on them for a few years.
How successful were those movies for you?
Very successful. I mean, the All Lost movies were grossing billions of dollars for the company.
Ma'am, do you know why you're here in court today?
I do. Last year we was filming all Lost 7 out in Europe, and we were doing one of the stunts. Peter died, and his family is suing the company.
Ma'am, did you hear Miss Veglahn say on opening statements that you let Mr. Jones fall?
I heard that, yes.
Is that true?
No. I would never do that to Peter. I mean, not only was he a great actor, but he was my close friend. What happened was a tragedy.
Okay then, ma'am, let's take a step back and talk about the preparation for the stunt.
Sure.
How did the studio come up with the idea?
Well, it wasn't the studio's idea. It was Peter's. He came up with the ideas for these stunts. He insisted on it, you know. He wasn't going to use a stunt double. He wasn't going to wear a harness. That was his idea.
What did the stunt entail?
So the specific stunt for All Lost 7, Peter was going to drive a motorcycle off a cliff, jump into midair, and then use a parachute to fall to the ground.
Well, ma'am, did you do anything to prepare Mr. Jones to ride a motorcycle off a cliff?
Absolutely.
What did you do?
Well, about a year before we actually filmed anything, we had started the prep. I mean, we ran this jump hundreds and hundreds of times. Peter knew what the jump was going to be like because he was practicing. We set up a ramp here in California, and that's where he was practicing the jump.
How many times would you say you practiced those jumps in total?
Over 100. I lost count.
Ma'am, how long did you spend doing those practices?
A little over a year.
How much money did that cost?
Millions of dollars.
Ma'am, I want to talk about the stunt itself.
Okay.
How many times did you film this?
We filmed that jump 7 times.
7 times. So for those first 6 times, how long did you wait to give the signal?
So the first 6 times we filmed June 20th, and we gave the signal for Peter to open his parachute 4 seconds after the motorcycle left the ramp.
What about that 7th time?
Well, that's when we changed the plan. We all agreed that we was going to wait 9 seconds instead of 4 before giving that signal to open the chute.
Why did you change the plan?
It had to do with the way that the scene was coming out. It was too short. We weren't getting the footage that we needed, so we agreed to make the change.
Ma'am, did you make sure that that change was safe before you agreed to it?
Of course I did.
How?
Well, we was working with a stunt coordinator. Her name is Sky Stebbins, and, well, she gave us the go-ahead.
And I want to talk about what actually happened during that 7th stunt.
Okay.
Did you give the signal?
Of course I did. I could never forget that day. It haunts me to this day.
How long did you wait to give that signal?
9 seconds, like we agreed.
What did Mr. Jones do?
So I was standing in the box. I'm watching him jump in the air, right? And 9 seconds go by. I'm looking at Peter. I'm yelling, "Open the chute, deploy, deploy!" And he doesn't do anything. I don't know what's happened. I don't know if he hears me, but all I know is he wasn't pulling the strings.
And what happened to Mr. Jones?
A few extra seconds went by before he finally pulled the strings, but it was too late. He died.
I want to talk about whether he accepted the risks of that stunt. Did you sign a contract with Mr. Jones before filming that movie?
Of course. I do that with all my clients.
Would you recognize that contract if I were to show it to you?
I believe so.
Ma'am, can you flip to Exhibit 33 in your binder? Let me know when you're there.
Absolutely. I'm there.
Ma'am, does that contract say anything about the risks associated with a stunt like this?
It does. In the 4th paragraph here, it even mentions the risk of death.
Did Peter accept those risks in that contract?
I mean, this is his signature right here. Clearly says, performer accepts the risks, including the risk of death, of the stunt described in the attached stunt plan. He knew the risks, but he jumped anyway.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. May I be heard?
Yes.
The witness just testified that Peter Jones knew the risks. She's talking about a contract for a different stunt. It's speculative to say that Peter Jones did know the risks of the stunt he was doing and jumped anyway.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I don't believe she's referring to the stunt that happened on July 21st specifically. I believe she's referring to the contents of this contract, and the fact that he signed it, which says the performer accepts the risks.
I'm going to sustain the objection in this case.
Yes, Your Honor. So, ma'am, could you finish reading us that line about whether the performer accepts the risks?
Absolutely. So, performer accepts the risk, including risk of death, of the stunt described in the stunt plan. Studio acknowledges its duty to provide a safe set and environment during the production of the film to adhere to the safety of the protocols. That's what we did.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further, Your Honor. Cross.
Cross.
Ms. Joig, I have a question.
Sure. You said you have a question, ma'am?
Ms. Joig, we can agree. That was more or less 15 seconds, right?
I have no idea. I wasn't keeping track.
Ma'am, we can agree that felt like more or less 15 seconds, true?
I'm a little nervous up here. I don't testify often. I wasn't counting.
Well, Ms. Joig, we can agree that 15 seconds, that's enough time for a person to free fall over 2,000 feet.
I'm aware of that, yes.
On June 21st, when Peter Jones was flying through the air, you knew that you were the one with the radio.
That's right. That was my job to tell him when to open the chute, and that's what I did.
Ma'am, you knew that at any time in those 15 seconds, you could radio Mr. Jones and tell him to open his parachute.
That's right. And after 9 seconds, that's exactly what I did.
Right, ma'am, I understand today you're claiming you told him at the 9-second mark, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But right now, I just want to be clear for the members of the jury.
Okay.
On June 21st, 2023, you watched Mr. Jones fall 2,000 feet in just 15 seconds. Right?
I did. I would never forget what I saw that day. It was horrible.
That's right, ma'am. Mr. Jones died that day. True?
He did.
I want to talk about why. Because we can agree the day before Peter Jones died, he did the original version of that stunt, the version that's in that contract, right?
That's right.
He performed that stunt 6 times.
That's what happened, yes.
He drove the motorcycle off the cliff, right?
That was the stunt.
6 times you gave him the signal at 4 seconds. Right?
6 times I gave him the signal.
6 times he landed without a scratch.
6 times he landed without a scratch, yes.
Let's talk about how you felt after that night. Because, ma'am, like you told us, you watched the footage back, right?
That's right, that's my job.
You didn't think it was good enough.
It wasn't.
That's right, ma'am. You thought the stunt had to be longer.
It needed to be longer if we wanted the shot that we were planning to get.
You wanted Mr. Jones to free fall for 9 seconds instead of just 4, right?
That was the idea I proposed.
Now, I want to be clear. I know 5 seconds might not sound like a lot of time, but you did know that 5 seconds was enough time for Mr. Jones to fall an additional 1,300 feet without a parachute.
Right.
Of course, ma'am, you knew that that was more dangerous than waiting just 4 seconds.
Sure. But Peter was an expert skydiver.
Ma'am,
He knew what he was doing.
you told us that you cleared it with the stunt coordinator to make sure it was safe, right?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, at this time, I'll be reading on to the record a portion of Skye Stebbins' deposition. She was the stunt coordinator for this stunt. Line 164. Before you left, did you discuss the possibility of doing an additional take of the stunt? Answer, yes. On June 20th, before the group dinner, Cole Doig pulled me aside. Doig asked if I thought we could do one more take of the motorcycle stunt on June 21st, except this time Doig would delay the signal until Peter had been in the air 9 seconds. Doig said, I used your numbers and it worked out. If I give the signal at 9 seconds, the parachute will be inflated by 13 seconds. Peter is still above 1,000 feet. That's still safe. Question, how did you respond? Answer, I said, no way. That's cutting it too close, especially when I'm not there. Ma'am, you claim that you gave Mr. Jones, that signal at 9 seconds. You were here in court today when Eli Gougion testified, right?
I was.
You were the only 2 people in the control room that day.
It was just us two.
You heard him say under oath that you did not give that signal at 9 seconds.
That's what he said. And Mr. Gougion, he's an honest guy, with all respect. But that's not what happened. I mean, I have a reputation to protect. I told him to pull the parachute. I would never forget what I said that day.
Ms. Joik, that's a yes. You heard Mr. Gougion say you did not give that signal at all. True.
That's what he said, yeah.
We can agree, ma'am, your company is the one being sued today, right?
That's right. That's why it's important that I tell you exactly what happened in that control room.
So you're telling us now that that's what happened in that control room. I want to talk about what you said about it back on June 21st.
Okay.
Because you actually talked to Eli Gougion then, too, right?
Yeah, we was in the room together.
Ma'am, after the stunt, Eli Gougion said, "How could you do this?" Right?
He was asking why I waited 9 seconds instead of 4, and I explained what I've been saying all day. We needed a longer scene.
Ma'am, that's not what Eli Gougion asked you, is it?
He asked me why I waited 9 seconds. Yes, he did.
He said, "Why didn't you make the call at 9 seconds?"
That's what he said.
Wouldn't you know it, ma'am, your response was the same thing you said to Peter Jones. Radio silence. True.
No, I told him that we needed a longer scene.
Ma'am, after Eli Gougion asked you why you never gave that call, you did not say a single word.
At that point, ma'am, we was standing over Peter's dead body. I didn't even have words to say.
Ms. Doig, that's a yes to my question. When Mr. Gougion asked you why didn't you give that call, you didn't defend yourself. You said absolutely nothing.
Right, I was in shock.
Ma'am, the first time we're hearing that you did, in fact, give that call is today, when your company is on the line.
No, I was deposed a little while ago, and I told them that I made the call then.
The first time Eli Gougion is hearing it is certainly now. True?
I don't know what Eli Gougion knows, or what he said, but he was there when I made the call, so he should know that.
Nothing further.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Then, do you rest, plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests.
Defense, do you rest?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does either side, and you may step down, thank you. Does either side need a moment to prepare closing arguments?
We're all right to go straight in, Your Honor.
We are as well.
Okay. Timekeepers set? Okay.
Ms. Volpert, members of the jury, and may it please the court, the defendant let Peter Jones fall. You know, the reason that Peter Jones was willing to drive a motorcycle off a cliff, and this might sound a little weird to you or I, but it's because he knew that, barring some unforeseen circumstances, he'd probably be fine. He'd practice it. He'd felt what it was like to hang in the air for 4 seconds, and he knew that he'd have the studio in his ear, telling him when to pull that chute. So when the plan changed the night before, when the air time was longer and he was falling an additional 1,300 feet, he wasn't worried then either, even though he'd never practiced it, because he knew he'd have the studio in his ear, telling him when it was safe to pull the chute. Today you learned they didn't do that. You learned instead they let him fall. That's why Peter Jones's family has sued Dragon Studios for negligence. As the plaintiff, we had a burden to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, just that it's more likely than not, that Dragon Studios was supposed to protect Mr. Jones. They failed to do that, and he died as a result. Certainly a burden we've met today. But the defense also came into trial with a burden of their own, to prove to you by the same standard, more likely than not, that Peter Jones knew the risks of the stunt he did on June 21st and chose to take that risk anyway. So the question that this case really comes down to is not whether Peter Jones knew that driving a motorcycle off a cliff was dangerous. It's whether he knew there was a chance the studio would say nothing when he needed that signal. That is not the burden that the defense has met. To show you exactly why, I want to focus on two very simple things. Cole Doig's decision not to give that signal caused Peter Jones's death, and Peter Jones had no way to know that his director would say nothing. So first, it was Cole Doig's decision not to give that signal that actually caused Peter Jones's death. And to understand exactly what went so wrong on June 21st, we actually have to understand what went right just one day before. We showed you the video of a successful stunt. Mr. Jones jumps on a motorcycle off a ramp, off of a cliff. 1, 2, 3, 4. He hears pull, and he pulls his parachute, members of the jury. That is the difference. Because we know that the next day, Cole Doig said nothing. Eli Gogion took this stand, under oath, with no reason to lie, and told you that Miss Doig sat there, silent, as Peter Jones fell through the air. And I understand that that's not what the defendant is claiming here in court. But when our witness says one thing and their witness says the other, it's your job to determine who's telling the truth. And in this case, it's not too hard of a job. Because there's one thing Miss Doig did admit, that Eli Gogion corroborated. That when she was asked about it on the day of, when Eli Gogion said, "Why didn't you give that signal?" she didn't say, "Of course I gave that signal. What are you talking about?" She didn't say, "He didn't pull the cord." She was silent. Now, the reason that the defense's burden is so interesting in this case is because of thing number 2. It was not enough for the defense to prove that Peter Jones knew he was taking a general risk. They had to prove that the risk that actually caused his death was one he was aware of. They had to prove that when Miss Doig didn't give that signal, Peter Jones knew that was a possibility. They waved around this contract all day. This was their smoking gun. They say, he wrote it right here. He said, "I assumed the risk of dying, but members of the jury, this was for a completely different stunt." And I know 4 seconds versus 9 seconds, it doesn't sound like a lot. Miss Volpert says it like it's nothing. But the difference between 4 seconds and 5 seconds is 1,300 feet of free fall off of a cliff. They're smoking gun, members of the jury. This contract, it's all smoke. No gun. I can't imagine what Mr. Jones must have felt like, watching the ground get closer and closer, spending 15 of his last 18 seconds waiting for the person he was trusting to save his life, and spending the last 3 realizing they'd let him fall. The thing that makes this case so confusing is that Mr. Jones's last thought must have been, "Where was my signal?" I have the same question today. I'm sure you do too. And we're not going to get an answer. But what you can do is make Dragon Studios and Cole Doig answer Peter Jones's family. They let him fall. Find them liable. Thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
I want you to imagine someone who's standing on top of a tank, an aquarium tank, and inside there's sharks swimming back and forth. Now imagine that person, instead of turning around and walking away, instead decides to dive headfirst into that tank. Now you can train that person to swim. You can give them a life vest, but when they dive into those shark-infested waters, well, if they get bitten, it's a risk that they knew when they jumped. Members of the jury, that might sound absurd, but you swap out that shark tank for a 2,700-foot cliff, a motorcycle, and a free fall, well, that's this case. When the plaintiff agreed to do that stunt, agreed to do it with that 9-second modification, and insisted on doing it himself, he accepted the consequences. He knew the risks, but he did it anyway. Despite that, the plaintiff has brought a claim of negligence against the defendant, Dragon Studios. Now, in bringing that claim, they took on a burden. They had to show by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that it was Dragon Studios' actions that caused Peter Jones's death. They didn't meet that burden today. But members of the jury, even if you think they did, even if you think Dragon Studios is negligent, well, there's another question you have to ask yourselves. Did Peter Jones assume the risks? You see, we had a burden today to prove to you that more likely than not, well, Peter Jones knew the risks that he was accepting, and he did it anyway. Members of the jury, we met that burden. And we did it by answering those 3 questions I posed on opening statements. How did Dragon Studios make that stunt safer? Why was that stunt still dangerous? Did the plaintiff know the risks and accept them? So let's start with that first question. How did Dragon Studios make that stunt safer? You see, Ms. Veglahn wants you to think that they barely lifted a finger. That they practically put him in a parachute and pushed him off that cliff, that they let him fall. But when Ms. Dolbeck took the stand, you heard that that's not true at all. That they spent over a year, over $1 million practicing this stunt. Dragon Studios didn't have to build a ramp to help Peter Jones practice that stunt, but they did. Dragon Studios didn't have to help him do over 100 jumps to practice, but they did. At every step, they did what they could to make that dangerous stunt as safe as it could be. But members of the jury, that brings me to my second question. Why was it still so dangerous? Well, members of the jury, I don't even need to tell you. You can look for yourself. He's riding a motorcycle off of a mountain that's 2,700 feet tall, jumping off that motorcycle and free falling. Members of the jury, that's a stunt that's dangerous no matter how many times you practice it. It's a stunt that can go wrong no matter how many times you practice it. That brings us to that third question. That stunt was so dangerous. Well, did Peter Jones know that it was dangerous? Did he accept those risks? Well, members of the jury, this is where that contract comes in. This contract that says that the performer accepts the risks of filming this movie, of filming this stunt, including injury and death. Now, Ms. Veglahn can tell you should just throw this contract out because it's not about 9 seconds, it's about 4 seconds. But members of the jury, let's be very clear. Every single thing in this contract is identical to the stunt they did the day of, except for those 9 seconds. So he accepted all of those risks up to those 9 seconds. But then when we get to the 9 seconds, well, you actually heard in court today that that's something he agreed to as well. You heard that from 2 different witnesses, not just ours. You heard it from Mr. Veglahn. He admitted on the stand today. Peter Jones, well, he accepted that new plan. Well, Ms. Veglahn tried to tell you that he only accepted it because he thought the stunt coordinator greenlit it and she actually didn't. She read that deposition in court today. Members of the jury, let's use our common sense here. That stunt coordinator is being deposed for a death on a stunt that she coordinated. Of course she's going to say that she didn't give the green light even if she did. She doesn't want to go to jail. She doesn't want to have to pay any money or be held liable in court. You heard it from Ms. Doig herself. She went to the stunt coordinator. She got the green light. Peter Jones, he accepted that plan and he knew it was dangerous. We know that he did. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take Mr. Jones's words. There are so many risks. If I don't survive this movie, well, there's no point in filming the rest of it. That's what he said just one day before filming the stunt that killed him. He knew the risks. And he did it anyway. Now, members of the jury, when you go back to that deliberation room, I want you to ask yourself one question. Because this is a he said, she said. One person saying that she gave the signal, the other person saying that she didn't, and you have to ask yourself what's more likely. So I want you to ask yourself if the plaintiff's story makes sense. Does it make sense that Miss Doig would risk the action star that's grossing her billions of dollars for a couple seconds of footage in one shot, in one movie? Members of the jury, that doesn't make any sense. She wouldn't do that, and she didn't. We're in court today, not because of what Miss Doig did, but because of what Mr. Jones did. He knew the risks. And he did it anyway. That's why at the end of this trial, or that's why I asked that you find Dragon Studios not liable. Thank you. Rebuttal?
Members of the jury, when Mr. Jones agreed to that change, he had to know what he was agreeing to. Miss Doig told you she cleared it with the stunt coordinator. We know that's not true. You think she was honest with Peter Jones? Folks, if I jump into a shark tank because Mr. Carson told me he'd throw me a raft, if he promised me he'd save my life and then he watched me drown, that's not on me. The defendant let Peter Jones fall. Find them liable. Thank you.
Well, great work. And breathe and drink some water. So we now must do our little ballot thing.
Your Honor,
Mhm.
could we get the last names of the two attorneys again?
Yes.
My last name is Veglahn. It's Veglahn, if it makes you spell it.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, good.
My last name's Volpert.
Thank you both.